And so we really need to carefully look at diet. I think dehydration is a big one. I think people are drinking tons of coffee and sodas and not drinking water and not understanding that plain water doesn't hydrate, that we do need electrolytes. We are missing minerals. That's another root cause of constipation is lack of minerals. If you don't have the electrical conductivity and those intestinal walls to contract and push food through, it's not going to happen.
Welcome to the Radical Health Rebel podcast. I'm your host, Lee Brandon. This work started for me several decades ago when I started to see the impact I could make on people, helping them to identify the root cause of their health problems that no doctor could figure out, including serious back, knee, shoulder and neck injuries, acne and eczema issues, severe gut health problems, even helping couples get pregnant after several IVF treatments had failed. And it really moves me to be able to help people in this way. And that is why I do what I do and why we have this show. Welcome to another episode of the Radical Health Rebel. Today, I'm thrilled to have Melissa Klepacki join us. Melissa is a root cause health consultant, healer, and acupuncturist who has transformed her own health after battling Lyme disease and chronic constipation. In this episode, we dive deep into the techniques Melissa uses to help her clients overcome constipation for good. We'll explore what constipation really is, the underlying causes, and natural, actionable solutions that empower you to reclaim your health through regular, healthy bowel movements. Stay tuned for an insightful and empowering conversation. Okay, Melissa Klepacki, welcome to the Radical Health Rebel podcast. Thanks for coming on the show.
I'm so happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's great to have you here, Melissa. And to kick things off, could you share perhaps your own health journey? I know you've had quite a checkered health journey yourself, but also perhaps a little bit about your academic and professional background as well.
Sure. I'm going to start with my academic and professional because that was before my health journey.
Okay.
However, my interest in medicine started when I was 16. My dad got diagnosed with cancer. And I worked in a radiology department of a hospital on the weekends and read through charts and was just, taking in everything that I could about medicine. Very interested in medicine going into college, but I got waylaid by a sport called rowing. Mm-hmm. I was a varsity athlete in college in the sport of rowing, which in England, you know very well. Mm-hmm. And that was pretty much my college career. My grades were really not my focus, though my junior year of college, I slipped and fell and broke a vertebrae in my back. And I was in a back brace and took time off from my sport. But after a year and a half, I hadn't healed. And I was in incredible pain. My PMS was worse. I had really bad headaches. I couldn't touch my toes. I was 21 years old and I felt like I was 90. And everyone told me that my back had healed and that I was fine. I should say that 2 months before I broke my back, my dad passed away. And where I broke my back, if you know anything about chakras and yoga, your heart chakra, behind your heart chakra are your thoracic vertebrae. Yeah. And that's what I compression fractured. Wow. And the doctor said, this is a really strange place to break your back. We don't really understand it. And I didn't think much of it at the time until a year and a half later, when I was having problems, someone convinced me to see an acupuncturist against my own will because I was terrified of needles. I had always been that kid that passed out when getting blood taken. But I remember going and thinking, I'm feeling brave. I'm going to try this because this person that I met spoke so highly of this practitioner. And the first he was an amazing practitioner that asked me questions about my health. No one had ever asked me about my symptoms, about my accident. And on the third treatment, I remember laying on the table and all of a sudden I started sobbing uncontrollably for an hour. He came into the practice room and he said, I don't have another patient. I'm going to let you have the room. This is a normal healing reaction. We obviously, tapped into something. You need to let it out. And that was the beginning of my healing. After that day, I felt so profoundly better. And the way that it was explained to me with the heart chakra and what I had been through made so very much sense to me. And I was healed and I needed to go understand what had happened. So I went to acupuncture school. I studied Chinese medicine, Japanese medicine, some body work, herbs, the whole gamut. I left with a master's degree in 1996 and worked in a myriad of places and jobs within the acupuncture world. But it wasn't until 2009 when I really got sick that things really changed for me. In 2009, I had gotten married. I had 2 little boys, and I woke up one morning and my hand was numb. And I thought, oh, maybe I slept on my neck wrong.
Mm.
And by the afternoon, I said to my husband, I think I need to lay down. It feels like my leg is going numb. And he said, do you need to go to the doctor? Are you sure? And I said, well, let me call the doctor. So when I called the doctor, they said, come in. By the time I got to the doctor's office, my left side of my face, my left arm, and my left leg were numb. I went to the ER. I was in the hospital for 3 days, had all kinds of tests done. And the only thing that came up abnormal was a low white blood cell count. And everyone shrugged and said, well, it wasn't a stroke. It could be the beginnings of MS. We're going to follow you, have a neurologist follow you for the next 6 months. We'll repeat an MRI, but we don't really know. So they sent me home. The numbness disappeared. I was left with a week of really bad headaches, then a week of really bad fatigue, and then it was gone. And that was in March of 2009. That summer, I developed a whole bunch of weird digestive issues, a lot of stomach pain. I'd never had stomach problems in my life. First, I thought I was pregnant, just had no idea what was going on. Went to the GI doctor, got all kinds of scopes done, swallowed a camera that took pictures all along my digestive tract. And again, no one could figure out what was wrong with me. Long story short, 12 doctors, 5 states, including a week at the Mayo Clinic. And no one knew what was wrong with me. I left Mayo Clinic with a diagnosis of fibromyalgia and chronic fatigue. And thinking to myself, honestly, that I was a little bit crazy. Because who could have symptoms so varied? Who could have numbness, 1 month and then all kinds of digestive problems the next month and then wake up one day with a swollen wrist out of nowhere and, almost a paralyzed joint that made no sense. A blinding migraine 1 month, an ovarian cyst the next month. It was just my whole system, all my systems were failing me. And it wasn't until I found a functional medicine doctor who did a bunch of weird tests that my normal doctor didn't run. She was looking for heavy metals, which was her first thought with some of my symptoms. And in fact, she found that I had very high levels of mercury. And so we did a little bit of treatment to get the mercury levels down, retested about 6 or 7 months later. And I said to her, I'm really not feeling much better. And she said, well, your levels look amazing. So obviously that's not what's causing your problems. And she decided to run some other tests. And one of them was a Lyme disease test, though I had told her I had Lyme disease tests. And she said, well, Lyme disease testing is tricky. And we were going to run it at a very specific lab in California called IGeneX. Sure enough, it was Lyme disease. But not until I saw a Lyme disease specialist did I understand that when you acquire Lyme disease, it's rarely just one bacterial infection that you get. So Lyme disease is under the umbrella of tick-borne diseases, and I had a few. I had Borrelia burgdorferi, which is the bacteria behind Lyme disease. I had Babesia, which looks a lot like malaria. I had Bartonella, and I had Rocky Mountain spotted fever. And whether that was from one tick bite, so I never saw a tick. I never had a rash. I was not an outdoorsy kind of gal. And whether that was I stepped into a pile of ticks and got a bunch of bites, or whether that was one tick bite, we'll never know. But I treated for years. I treated Westernly. I treated with IV antibiotics. I wound up with a PICC line in my arm and then a massive blood clot. It was a journey. And again, then, right? So first I learned I had Lyme and started treating, but then I wasn't getting better. Then I learned I had co-infections and I started treating, but I wasn't quite getting better. I was sort of on a roller coaster. But it wasn't until I learned that I had some mold, some toxic mold, and some parasites some overgrown parasites that were as much of the Lyme that I could get rid of in my tissues, because Lyme doesn't live in your bloodstream, it lives in your tissues. As much of that as I could get rid of, it was still being housed by the parasites that were living mostly in my GI tract. And so essentially reinfecting myself.
Mm.
And with mold, I don't know how much you know about mold and mold toxicity, but there's a segment of the population that has a genetic SNP, and we are unable to process mold. Most people, they come in contact with mold, they breathe it in, they touch it, their body goes, oh, that's mold, packages it up and sends it out. But with people with this genetic SNP, their bodies can't recognize that. And what happens is that their body just sort of walls it off and stores it in the body, where it can grow and cause lots and lots of problems.
Mm-hmm.
So I also had that. So once I got rid of the parasites, got rid of the mold, kept my heavy metal levels down, did I feel fully recovered from Lyme? And it was sort of this journey and this learning.
Mm.
Along the way, one of the biggest problems that happened for me was that my gut shut down. I had been on so many antibiotics because different bacterial infections require different antibiotics. And so I was on a couple of drugs for Lyme disease, a couple different drugs for Babesia. I was on a different drug for Bartonella. And I wiped out all the good bacteria in my gut. And so, and that, besides the fatigue of Lyme disease, the gut issues were probably the most horrific, right? Because it's very life-changing. To be frank, when you can't poop, life isn't going well. When you're bloated and not feeling well, and it's on your mind that, I just don't feel right, I feel backed up, when am I going to have a chance to poop? If I'm at a meeting, or if I'm at a conference, or if I'm out with my kids, I had to stop doing things like going hiking. Because what if I was in the middle of a hike and I had to poop? I had and after, right? So once you wipe out your good gut bacteria, then you start eating away at your gut lining. Then you develop food sensitivities. And I had all of that. So not only could I not hike and do the things that I wanted to do and be active, but I couldn't even go out to dinner with my friends because I would look at the menu and I'd be like, that's going to make me feel sick. That's going to make me feel sick. Very isolating when you have gut issues. And so now the work I do today is sort of this interesting combination of, I work with a lot of people who are chronically ill and undiagnosed, like I was. Many of them do have something like a parasitic infection or mold or a tick-borne disease, but almost all of them come to me constipated. And until people are moving their bowels on a daily basis and experiencing that daily detox that's so necessary before we can kill anything in the body, right? Because if we're not moving dead bacteria out and it's sitting in the colon, that's toxic. That's retoxing yourself.
Yeah.
So we need to make sure that people are moving bowels every day. I say every morning, at least once a day, before we can start to do any work.
Yeah.
Killing or detoxing anything.
Yeah.
So that's why I put together a program. I put together a great program called Gut Reset 123. It's to take everybody who, before you start killing or detoxing or anything, you've got to get your gut straight. And so the program is a 12-week program that includes a lot of foundational health education, but also, and really importantly, one of the best gut tests on the market, the one that I think is the best gut test on the market, that's going to tell us what's actually happening in the gut. Did you wipe out all your good bacteria? Because some people actually have too much good bacteria. They've got this overgrowth. Some people have got really bad gut bugs. And some of those gut bugs, we know now, cause autoimmune diseases. Right? Cause downline problems. And so by nipping that in the bud and starting with the gut, we clear lots of problems for people. And we get people pooping. So if they need further treatment, then that's the next step.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting hearing your story, because I've actually got a similar one, because I had acne for 18 years and I was on antibiotics the whole time. So when I finally went to someone who knew what they were doing and they ran tests on me, my doctor never ran any tests on me at all. It's just, take this antibiotic And I'd take it for a while and come back and say, look, it's not working. He'd say, oh, okay, take this one instead then. And that was his, his guidance for 18 years. But when I finally went to see someone, and interestingly, the first 30 years of my life, I was constipated. I didn't know it because I did have a bowel movement every day, but that doesn't necessarily mean you're not constipated. So I went to see this guy and he ran tests on me and he said, well, look, you've got candida overgrowth. It's like, no surprise there after taking antibiotics for so long. And then he held up a sheet of A4 paper that was full of all the foods that I was sensitive to. And then I followed his recommendations for 2 weeks and my skin cleared up after 18 years. So it's a similar-ish story. So I want to dive deep into constipation because, like you say, it is a big issue.
Yeah,
and we know, we know it's a big problem for Americans, right? I mean, a lot of people in Europe will say Americans are full of it, but right, that's
it's true. Yeah, it's true.
But it's a problem. I would say it's not just an American problem. I would say it's a Western world problem. It's probably just as prevalent in Europe as it is in North America as well. But why do you think it is such a big and I'd say common issue? I first met Amelia at a health club where I was hosting an event offering back screenings to the members. The first thing I noticed about Amelia was a dullness in her eyes, which I later realized was due to extreme pain. And I noticed that she was unable to turn her head and had to turn her whole body if she wanted to look in a different direction. Amelia informed me that she had a history of repeated shoulder and neck pain for the last 2 years and was diagnosed with spinal stenosis at C4-5, C5-6, and C6-7. And a stenosis is a blockage, which in Amelia's case was in the spinal canal of her neck, irritating her spinal cord. She had extreme tenderness over her neck and trapezius muscles on both sides, and she suffered from severe neck pain continuously. Amelia informed me that she'd been advised that spinal surgery was the only option, but the surgery came with great risks, including potential paralysis, and no guarantee of success, which made Amelia fearful of the surgery. In addition to this, Amelia suffered from continuous exhaustion, painful intestinal gas and bloating, even though she felt she was following a healthy diet. After a thorough evaluation, I designed Amelia a corrective exercise, nutrition, and lifestyle plan, plus I referred her to a Nuka chiropractor for specific adjustments to her neck. After following the plan religiously, Amelia is much stronger and much more flexible than she's ever been before, and no longer suffers from repeated neck pain and has full range of motion in her neck. Amelia also reported that her energy was maximized and that she no longer suffers from the gripping stomach pains that had dominated her life for a very long time. If you're suffering like Amelia was and you'd like to find out more about getting to the root cause of your pain, go to www.bodycheck.co.uk, that's bodychek.co.uk, to request your consultation.
I think it's multifold, right? It's multifactorial reason. There's never really just one reason. But I think that the diet in this country is abysmal. I think if you think about standard American diet, it's a bagel with cream cheese and a cup of coffee for breakfast, 2 slices of pizza and a Coke for lunch, a cheeseburger and fries, and maybe a Sprite because you're avoiding caffeine at night for dinner. There's no fiber. There's a ton of preservatives, right? Seed oils, gluten, all that stuff is very gut destructive. So our diet, number one, that's, the lack of fiber. Number two, the glyphosate that's in this country. You don't have it in Europe. It's why Americans go to Italy or Paris or wherever in Europe, I guess, and eat the bread or the pasta and feel great. And say, I did so well there. And then I came home and had pasta and I was really sick. It's the glyphosate. It's not the gluten.
Yeah.
And so we really need to carefully look at diet. I think dehydration is the big one. I think people are drinking tons of coffee and sodas and not drinking water and not understanding that plain water doesn't hydrate, that we do need electrolytes. We are missing minerals. That's another root cause of constipation is lack of minerals. If you don't have the electrical conductivity and those intestinal walls to contract and push food through, it's not going to happen, right? We know magnesium is deficient. We're so deficient in magnesium as a species. And we know that magnesium citrate, the magnesium comes in many forms, but we know magnesium citrate, for one, is really helpful for moving bowels. Fatty liver. There's a lot of alcohol use in this country. It's not only the alcohol use, but it's the processed foods that's driving fatty liver. With a fatty liver, you can't release the amounts of bile that you need to help with proper digestion and elimination. Medications. How many Americans over the age of 50 aren't on any medications? And how many of those medications are constipating? A lot. All those antidepressants that people are on, constipating, right? And then parasites and mold constipate everybody. And we know that the buildings in our country and in the US we have a lot of sick building syndrome, a lot of water damaged buildings. I watch homes go up. I live in New Jersey. I watch homes go up all the time. And I just watch storms, hitting the insulation and hitting the wood, thinking to myself, that's going to be a mold problem someday. And so mold will constipate you for sure. So, is it a bigger problem in this part of the world? Yes. I mean, if you're in Africa and you're a hunter gatherer and you're getting your fiber and, you're getting your movement, a lack of movement, right? Another reason people in this country are constipated. You can't, if you don't move your body, your bowels aren't moving. If you've seen it with babies, I see it all the time with babies that are constipated, friends that have babies. All you need to do is move them around, rotate their pelvises, move their legs, give them some movement in that lower body, and they'll poop. We need the same. We're just big babies, right? But we don't. We sit all day. And then the stress level in this country is out of control. People wake up at 6:00 in the morning and expect to be out of the house at 6:30. And in between 6 and 6:30, it's brush the teeth, shower, feed the dog, wake the kids. There's no time to poop. You haven't left yourself time for that. And it's so important. It's the most important part of your morning. And people aren't making time for it.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, just the act of being stressed also shuts down motility as well, right? So you've got to be in a parasympathetic state to actually create those contractions through the GI tract.
If you were being chased by a lion, there's not a chance you'd poop. Right. And that's that same fight or flight feeling that most people have, that adrenaline rush in the morning when the alarm goes off to get out of bed and fight.
So someone once said throwing a cartwheel is not a good thing to do when you're being chased by a lion.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. Every cell in your body is on the job just to get away. Right. It's definitely not going to be worrying about. Actually, in those situations, you might actually go to the toilet. Actually,
you might poop your pants.
But generally speaking, chronic stress will slow down your motility. The other thing as well, I would probably add to that, is methane producing bacteria. If there's too many of them as well, can also slow down motility as well.
For sure, but that's going to usually come from other things that are a lot of times when we see an overgrowth of, if you're talking about, for instance, SIBO, it starts further up in the digestive tract. So usually it's a lack of stomach acid that's causing things to not be broken down, so that things are actually fermenting too low. And that goes back to diet. That really goes back to medications. If people have been feeling stressed for years and taking Tums, and it's American medicine. I don't know if you have Tums.
We know Tums.
Or PPIs, right? Proton pump inhibitors, which are given out like candy at the GI doctor's office. Those stop your stomach acid. If you don't have enough stomach acid, number one, that flap, you have a flap, right, that closes between the stomach and the esophagus that keeps the acid in the stomach.
I know that very well.
If you don't have enough acid, it can't keep that closed. And so people always think that it's a lack of stomach acid that's causing this reflux. I'm going to go out on a limb and say 90% of the time, it's not enough acid.
Yeah, I agree.
It's not too much acid. So we really need to pay attention to how we're digesting. There's tests that you can do, like eat a steak, sit down and eat a piece of red meat with nothing else, and see how you feel after a half an hour, 45 minutes. If you're having problems digesting that, if you're belching, if you're bloated, if you've got stomach pain, you don't have the acid to digest that. It's just a simple home test.
Yeah.
But it'll give you a better sense. And then you can do things like supplement your stomach acid.
Yeah.
Once your stomach acid, once you have enough stomach acid and you're actually you have the stomach acid to kill everything as it's going through your digestive tract, your digestion will shift.
Yeah. So imagine someone's listening to this and they're thinking, well, I'm constipated. I have been for quite a long time. Things aren't great. Where would be a good place for them to start their journey to, normal bowel movement, shall we say?
Yeah. I wrote an ebook. It's at startpoopingbetter.com. Easy to remember and funny to say. But there's some tips in there, and I'll tell you a little bit about it. You can go and check it out. But we talked about water, right? And being hydrated, and the fact that coffee and sodas aren't hydrating. And people think, well, I drink 8-ounce glasses of stuff a day. It needs to be water, and it needs to be clean water. In this country, our tap water is abysmal. When I do a search for what's in the water, my water company here in New Jersey, there's arsenic, there's radioactive elements, there's PFOS and PFAS, which were chemicals developed by the DuPont company in the 70s. They're forever chemicals. We can't figure out how to degrade them. They're getting into our bodies. They're starting to cause lots of problems. I recommend when I work with clients, especially if we're doing detox work, that they drink only distilled water, because distilled water is just H2O. There's not another thing in it. Distilled water is made from boiling water and capturing the steam vapor. And that's what you're drinking, that condensed steam vapor. And then making sure you're taking a mineral supplement every day is the best way to stay hydrated. Those minerals will help you to get, and a little bit of sodium you need to get the water into the cell. So making sure that you're hydrated, give it. And also, as I give these little tips, people need to realize that gut health doesn't change overnight. And I like to educate people about the microbiome and the gut and liken it to a garden, because it's something we're all kind of familiar with. If you went out to your yard and just dug a hole and planted a plant and walked away, probably wouldn't do very well. But if you dug a hole and you added some compost and you added some water and you added some vitamin mix and you made sure it was in the right place in the sun, and then you planted it and then it rained and the sun hit it, you'd have a much better chance of growing that plant. But it's also not an overnight thing, right? If you plant it from a seed, for instance, because that's what we're doing when we take probiotics. We're just planting seeds. So if the gut is healthy and we plant seeds with probiotics and then we feed them with the proper nutrition, we don't kill them with things like artificial sweeteners, right? Which we know damage the gut microbiome. We're taking good care and tending to that garden. Things will grow and prosper, but it takes time. It takes at least 3 months to see changes. And while constipation can resolve fairly quickly, once people start to make changes, sustained changes will give you sustained results. For instance, you drink a ton of water for a week and you're really hydrated and you're pooping well, and then you go back to not drinking water, you're going to go back to not pooping well, right? We need to make these changes and make them sustained. And then when it comes to diet, there's a recipe in that startpoopingbetter.com book. I call it good poop vegetable soup. And it's a great recipe because, number one, it's simple. Anyone can make it. If you live in a food desert, you don't have access to fresh fruits and vegetables, but you can get canned stuff. You can make it all with canned or frozen. If you're a farmer's market person, you can make it all with fresh. It can be vegan with a vegetable broth base. It can be really hearty with a bone broth base. You can add meat to it. You can change the vegetables. But the point is that it's just a high fiber, very nutritious, filling soup that's feeding your microbiome. And so we need to think about the nutrition part. And we need to also think about things like, what is my probiotic status and what does my digestive sufficiency look like? Do I have enough stomach acid and digestive enzymes? And do I have enough good probiotics in my gut to do, all these probiotics we're learning have different jobs, right? And so we need, and when we talk about the gut microbiome, one of the most important things is in this garden that we're growing, that we have all kinds of wildflowers growing in that garden. We don't want a monocrop of tulips, right? So we don't want to take only one kind of probiotic again and again and again. That's planting the same seed.
Yeah.
We want to make sure the probiotics that we take are varied, that we're using products like kimchi and kefir, right, which are naturally fermented pickles to help support the microbiome in a wide range. Those are really basic, easy ways to get started that can make a big difference if people haven't tried, right? So we just talked about water, we talked about nutrition, we talked about digestive enzymes, we talked about probiotics. A combination of those. It depends on, right, what your root cause of constipation is. If you have tons of good probiotics in your body and you take a probiotic, is it going to help you? Probably not. But if you're really dehydrated all the time and you start actually drinking water and taking some minerals, I bet you'll see a difference.
Yeah. What if someone, let's say they're in a really bad way and they really feel like they really need to move their bowels? Obviously, what you're talking about is a long-term solution by dealing with the root cause. Is there any advice you would give for kind of a short-term relief? I'm briefly interrupting this episode to remind you can now hear an extra No Punches Pulled episode every month with an amazing and almost certainly controversial guest who's not scared to put their head above the parapet. These guests are exposing lies and corruption, sharing their stories of being gaslit or cancelled for telling the truth, and offering real-world solutions to achieving optimal health and maintaining freedom amidst increasing censorship and restrictive regulations. These are the types of episodes I started producing back in 2022, for which I was cancelled on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and deplatformed from LinkedIn. These additional episodes are for subscribers only. For the equivalent of one takeaway coffee per month, you can now become a paid subscriber and receive exclusive access to content the authorities do not want you to hear. I really hope you can support the podcast to help it continue and also to help me bring you even better, more controversial, educational, and inspiring guests. Subscribing to the Radical Health Rebel podcast is a much more productive investment than supporting organizations that feed you lies, propaganda, and predictive programming like TV licensing, cable, satellite, and major film streaming services. Subscribing to the Radical Health Rebel podcast to receive premium content couldn't be simpler. Just go to the show notes, click on support the show, and follow the instructions. In fact, why not do it right now? And once you've subscribed, come straight back and listen to the rest of the episode. For the equivalent of just one takeaway coffee per month, let's rebel against the mainstream narrative and create a healthier, fairer, and freer world together. Thanks for listening and for your support.
Yeah, I don't really deal with short-term situations, right? I'd like to do things like magnesium citrate, vitamin C, high dose vitamin C can often help move bowels. MCT oil. Sometimes if you think maybe, especially for people, we haven't talked about the Bristol stool chart. Let's back up for one sec, if you will. Let's talk about actually what is constipation. right? And what is a normal poop?
Mm.
Because that is something I feel like most people are not very clear on, because we stop talking about poop with our children or whatever when our kids are done being potty trained. Maybe when they're 5 and 6, we say, "Did you poop today?" But we don't ask anything else,
Yeah.
right? And if you go visit your doctor for anything other than, massive stomach issues, and they might ask on a form, like, "Do you poop regularly?" Now, for some people, the answer is, yes, I poop regularly once a week.
Mm.
That's not very helpful,
Yeah.
right? So I have a whole litany of questions that I talk to my clients about, obviously, because it's my work, but a normal bowel movement, right? Being unconstipated is moving your bowels daily without strain, not having to sit on the toilet for 15 minutes, right? Waiting to poop. It should be like a feeling I have to poop. I go to the bathroom, I evacuate my bowels. There is something people can refer to called the Bristol stool chart, and it has pictures. It labels poops 1 to 7. 1 would be a poop that looked like a goat pellet. And that's what I was going to say for people who have goat pellet poops. I sometimes like to think that we're maybe not moisturized from the inside out, and some MCT oil, medium chain triglyceride oil, you can put it in your morning coffee, can sometimes help. And also making sure that your omega-3 status is good, that we're lubricated from the inside out. That's number 1 on the Bristol stool chart, that poop that looks like goat pellets. And then at the bottom, number 7 is diarrhea. So what we're looking for, the perfect poop, is the number 4. And that looks like a cylindrical snake. If it's a long poop, it curls up in the toilet. It doesn't break. It doesn't have hard edges. It's dark in color, but not black. There's never blood, right, in our stool. That's always a warning. If anyone ever sees blood in their stool, to reach out to their primary care physician. And it should be easy to pass. And when you wipe, it shouldn't be a mess. That is a perfect poop.
Mm. Yeah. What I teach is, I don't know if you've seen the Poopie police lineup.
I haven't.
No. So let me see if I can actually get it up on the screen. He says, there we go. Okay, so let me see if I can enlarge that maybe. You can't see it very well, but basically here's the Poopie policeman on the right. So you can see it's like a nice chocolate brown kind of color, quite big. And the recommendation is you should be passing about 12 inches a day of the Poopie policeman. But then you've got different types of poops here as well. So you've got flasher. So that's someone that's not digesting all their food properly. This one's diarrhea. So that's obviously diarrhea. This is pellet man, which you described. This is bodybuilder man. So this is really dry. So this would be really hard to pass, a lot of effort required. This is Olympic swimmer. So this is ones that come out very white, which might be someone that can't absorb their fats very well. And this one on the left is toxic man. So this one would be really stinky. So quite dark in color and very stinky. So we
that's funny.
Yeah. And it's funny because it's, when you show it to children, they laugh, they think it's quite entertaining, but actually it's just as educational for adults as well. And there's a bit of humor to it as well. But so it's just an alternative to the Bristol chart, basically.
Yeah, I just think it's important for people to understand what's normal, because I have so many conversations with people, and I'll say, are your bowels normal? And they'll say yes. And I'll say, how many times a week do you go to the bathroom? And they'll say 3. And I'll say, is that unassisted? And they'll say, no, I take Miralax. And it's like, you just keep going down this path, and it just gets worse and worse. What people, they think it's regular because they're going regularly because they're taking Miralax. And people have to understand that taking those kinds of products, first of all, Miralax is toxic. Second of all, they're forcing your bowel evacuation. So any of those nutrients that you would have had time to absorb during that intestinal transit time are not being absorbed. So a lot of people wind up nutritionally really deficient when they're having these 3 times a week Miralax bowel movements where everything is flushing.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and I completely agree with what you were saying before about if someone wants a short-term relief, then magnesium citrate, vitamin C is probably the safest way to go. But ultimately, that's still not curing the problem, right? It's just a bit of short-term relief. You still need to do the hard work to solve it long term. So one thing you've mentioned already is testing. So can you maybe explain a little bit about the type of test that you might run for someone who is constipated and why that's so important?
Sure. So there's a test here in the US by Diagnostic Solution Laboratories called the GI map. It's a PCR test that looks for
we have
the
that.
DNA.
We have that here as well.
Oh, you do? Yeah, it's highly recommended. I like it because it gives a ton of information, but there are other tests out there that I feel like almost give too much information. They're telling us about these strains of bacteria that we're still not really sure what they do. For instance, one of the big new finds in gut health is Akkermansia muciniphila, right? That's a commensal bacteria that we need in our guts. If you understand any Latin, the last part of that word, muciniphila, mucin, has to do with mucus. And this is talking about the lining of the intestines, right? So we have the lining of the intestines that protects there's a lining that protects a mucus lining that protects the actual lining, right? The lining of the intestines has junctions that we hope are tight and small that open to let nutrients pass through. But when we've worn away that mucus barrier, and things are constantly hitting that intestinal wall, degrading it, those junctions open up and food particles are actually able to pass through and into the bloodstream, which is where we wind up with food sensitivities and autoimmune conditions. So the GI map is now testing for that Akkermansia muciniphila. I find it low on a lot of people. Easily replaced. There's a company out there called Pendulum that makes an Akkermansia muciniphila product that you can take to replace the bacteria in your gut. If you have a gut lining issue, you also would need to do some work in repairing the gut lining with things like deglycerides, licorice, and glycine, right? Those nutrients help to repair that gut lining.
It's quite interesting because in all the stool tests I've done in the last 10 years, they haven't found any Akkermansia. But again,
you have no Akkermansia?
None. They've never found any.
So you need to take some.
Yeah, I wasn't aware of that actually. So
so it's a relatively new. It's an oxygen sensitive species, and they had a hard time figuring out how to get it down into the gut. But this company called Pendulum has figured out how to coat it so that it makes its way to where it needs to go.
Yeah, I'll definitely look into that.
Yeah, I took it for a month. I did my own GI map a couple months ago and had taken a few months previously around, which is like 30 days, just a bottle of the Akkermansia. My levels were great. So the GI map, what does it look for? It looks for pathogens. The whole first page of the test, I refer to the diarrhea page because it's usually people who have really loose stools that have some of these bacteria that can get into the system on the first page. Then it talks a lot about the good bacteria, right? We know what we need and what's it looking like in your gut? What's your lactobacillus look like? What does your fecal bacterium prosnitzii look like, right? We know that each of these bacteria have different roles. So we take a look at what's missing and we make a mental note, okay, low on fecal bacterium prosnitzii needs a supplement. Low on Akkermansia needs that supplement. Then it looks at some really cool digestive markers, how we're processing fats, how we're breaking down protein, tells us about digestive insufficiency. How is the immune system of the gut, right? Because our immune system, there's a lot of our immune system that's made in the gut. So it'll tell us about our immune system. It'll tell us, are we sensitive to gluten? There is a test for the anti-gliadin molecule, and it will tell us if people are gluten sensitive. Sometimes I will ask clients if they have gluten sensitivity, and they'll say, I don't have any problems with gluten. And then we'll run the test and it's off the charts. And I'm like, well, you might not feel it, but it's driving massive inflammation in your body. The test also looks at the levels of inflammation. It looks on how you're processing your hormones, sort of the state of your liver a little bit. So much information. And from there, you're able to really make a decision about a treatment protocol. What do we need to remove? What do we need to replace? What do we need to repair?
Yeah. Do you ever deal with, obviously you can do breath testing for SIBO. Do you ever do that at all?
I don't do a lot of SIBO. I really focus on the GI map test. And I kind of have found that when we treat a lot of other issues, because usually people don't just have SIBO, right? It's usually stemming from things like low stomach acid. There's other things on the test that will show up. We can usually resolve it. SIBO is a little tricky. H. pylori is a little tricky to treat. A lot of people are testing positive for H. pylori. And for anyone who doesn't know what H. pylori is, that's a bacteria that infects the lining of your stomach. It's a really interesting bacteria and a really smart bacteria because it doesn't live in a high acid environment. So you would think, why does it live in the stomach where the acid is really strong? But it emits a enzyme called urease that lowers the pH of the stomach acid. Or raises the stomach. It makes it more neutral so that it can thrive and survive.
Yeah.
And so when you don't have sufficient stomach acid, it's not acidic enough, leads to a whole host of other problems. So we need to eradicate the H. pylori, then we slowly raise the level of the stomach acid, and we hope it doesn't come back. It's pretty stubborn and can be, when I see a woman, for instance, in my practice that has H. pylori, I always insist that her husband get tested because a lot of times we're sharing saliva and transmitting it back and forth.
Yeah.
But that causes lots of problems. H. pylori causes a lot of autoimmune diseases. It can be responsible for stomach cancer, Barrett's esophagus, etc. So,
yeah, I've found Matula tea works really well for
Matula tea.
Yeah,
and mastic gum is another really good
mastic
one.
gum's another. Yeah, I've found Matula tea to be the most effective when it comes to H. pylori. Although to be fair, I haven't tested anyone positive for H. pylori for quite a long time. I'm not quite sure why that is, but yeah, I always found Matula tea works very, very well. So when it comes to healing, how important do you think community or having your own health tribe is? Julie, a 47-year-old who works in computer sales, came to see me complaining of lifelong irritable bowel syndrome, which included severe abdominal pain and bloating, loose and very frequent stools, along with hot flushes, menstrual brain fog, and low energy, which affected her work performance. After taking a comprehensive history, plus running some labs, I discovered that Julie had a parasite infection, which may have been causing the loose stools, a methane-producing bacterial overgrowth that was almost certainly causing the abdominal bloating and pain, a leaky gut, low levels of digestive enzymes, as well as eating too many high oxalate foods on her vegetarian diet. So Julie reduced the high oxalate foods from her diet, plus she took a broad-spectrum antimicrobial supplement to help with the parasites and the bacteria in her gut, probiotics to increase her good bacteria and help repair her gut lining. She also took prebiotics to help feed the commensal bacteria, digestive enzymes to improve her digestion, and herbs to help clear out the toxic lipopolysaccharides from her system produced by the overgrowth of gram-negative bacteria. At the end of the program, Julie reported that her health had never been better, In her own words, the improvement is staggering. The abdominal pain and bloating was gone. Her stools were back to normal. Her energy was up. She no longer had brain fog or hot flashes, and her immune system had improved as she no longer suffered from frequent bugs and colds. If you're suffering like Julie was and you want to get to the root cause of your problem, you can arrange a consultation with me at bodycheck.co.uk. That's BODYCHEK. And if we're a good fit, I could help you achieve the same kind of results as Julie. Now, back to the podcast.
I think it's essential. It's the reason that I am building this Gut Reset 123 program for people, because illness isolation is a real thing, especially when you're dealing with constipation, diarrhea, bloating, etc. Like I told you, I couldn't go hiking and I couldn't go out to dinner with my friends. No one understood. No one certainly wanted to hear my trials and tribulations, right? No one wants to talk about poop. And so I think when we are healing, to have a group of people that understand our misery, what we're going through, that can celebrate little wins and victories with us, is it's game changing. It's really part of the healing. That I think is really important. And I also think mindset. I deal outside of constipation, which most people don't feel panicked that constipation is going to kill them, right? But I do have patients that are really sick and undiagnosed and feeling like, their health is in jeopardy. And those people, I feel, really need community.
Yeah.
And we do that on group Zoom calls. We do that on a group Facebook page where we can support each other through whatever we're going through every week.
Yeah. I think that's great. I think community is very, very important. I think the one thing you do need to be careful of as well is that misery does also love company, right? So how do you make sure you kind of balance that to make sure that things are kept positive rather than just kind of wallowing in kind of self-pity?
I think that you can do it. There's a lot of redirection you can do, right? Part of being a healer is being an educator and a counselor, right? And so I really don't have too many experiences where people have gone off the deep end, like on a group call or on Facebook. I feel like when someone's having a hard time, people are more than willing to jump in and support if people are having a hard day or they're struggling with something. I haven't really run into that. Is that something you're running into a lot?
No, but I just know that can be the case. I mean, one thing I do see, because I do work with a lot of people with acne, and what I find is rather than these people trying to find a long-term solution, they're trying to find the next magic bullet product, and everyone's kind of in that same kind of mindset, and it's very difficult. Even though with my background, 18 years of suffering and 28 years as a clinician, that even as gentle as I try and nudge them towards trying to find the root cause rather than treating the symptom, which generally doesn't work anyway and often makes them worse, I often get quite aggressive responses, and I'm spending my own free time trying to help these people, and I often just get abuse and, this guy's a grifter, he's this, he's that. I'm like, look, guys, I'm just trying to nudge you in the right direction. I'm not even being aggressive in any way.
Because people don't want to hear the truth. People don't want to hear that they're responsible for their health.
Yeah.
What is happening in your body is a direct result of what you've done to it, what your daily habits are, right? The weekend warrior who runs 10 miles once a month is not going to have the same results as people who are consistently putting in the work.
Yeah, absolutely. Can you perhaps give us like a success story of someone that you've worked with that had constipation?
Sure. I have a lot of them, a lot of really good ones.
Oh, you can share as many as you want.
One of my favorites is about a guy that I worked with who was an Asian guy who couldn't say the word poop, who could barely say the word bowel movement when we started talking on the phone. He's a programmer in Boston, in his late 20s, and he had incredible gas, bloating, constipation that became so bad that it was ruining his job. He had to keep getting up from his desk in the middle of, a coding. He would say, like, it took me like 5 minutes to get into programming this thing. And then I would be on a roll, and then I would have to leave my desk to go to the bathroom, to fart or poop or whatever, because he had so much bloating and gas, and then come back. And it would take me 5 minutes to figure out where I was in that code. Meanwhile, I'm disturbing my office mates. And it really became life-wrecking for him. And we did lab testing. We figured out what was going on with him. He did a really great protocol and is totally fine today and got his life back and was able to actually talk coherently about poop and bowel movements and the Bristol stool chart and just had it all down. And I just watched him come into his own and not only fix his constipation, but really own his health. Right. And that's where the power is. When we realize that we're not helpless, and it's not hopeless. And we perhaps haven't gotten the right information.
Yeah.
Right? As Americans, we're used to going to the doctor and holding out our hand, saying, oh, what's the prescription for this?
Yeah.
And then putting it in our mouth and walking away and not thinking about that doctor, that appointment, or our health until the next thing creeps up or the next appointment comes up. And health is a daily process. It is an active process, being healthy. Right?
Yeah. Yeah, it's something that's, it's saddened me because I've seen it so much, since I've been doing this work for the last, 2.5 or more decades. And it's like people have just infantilized themselves, rather than become an adult and just take responsibility for themselves. It's always someone else is going to fix me. And it's really hard to see. And the sad thing is, the people that they're going to help them, whether they realize it or not, are actually harming them as well. So it's a very, very, very sad situation. So just to kind of finish off, what would you say, because we've spoken about a few things, if someone's listening to this now, they've got constipation, what would be the top 3 things that you might suggest that they start with?
I would say go to startpoopingbetter.com, download the book, read the tips that are in there. If you're not getting results by following foundational health steps, right, you need to pay attention to what you're eating and what your stress level's like. How are you sleeping? What's your morning routine? Have you built in time to poop? And if those things don't work, I think my best advice would be to find someone who will run a test like the GI map for you, because that will give you, right, the proof is in the pudding. You'll have actionable information. You'll be able to see, at the very least, right, the very least, you'll have an understanding of, do I have a gluten sensitivity? Do I have enough digestive enzymes? Am I processing fat and protein well? Which probiotic should I take? Because otherwise, in this country, they're $60 to $100 for a bottle of probiotics. And if you don't need that probiotic, it's a waste of money. So you'll have a sense of, what do I need? And then you'll also have a sense of what's in there that doesn't belong there. And hopefully the practitioner that's run your test will prescribe some, wonderful herbal concoction that will take care of it for you.
Yeah. Awesome. So what's next for you, Melissa?
Well, this year I spoke on a national stage to 1,500 practitioners,
Amazing.
doctors, nurses, about constipation, about the 8 root causes of constipation. And that was a big one for me. That was a big stretch.
Where was that?
That was at the Cellcore conference in Dallas, Texas in May of this year. And I learned a lot about myself. I love to do things where I push myself. So I'm currently looking for that next opportunity of where I'm doing a local presentation about environmental toxins. I'm talking to the Cellcore group. Cellcore is a company based here. Do you know them?
Yeah.
They're a wonderful company. And I'm talking to next week, actually, on a podcast. I'm talking about constipation to consumers, about what you can do, right? What you can do yourself, what you need to try before you go down the route of testing and seeing someone. And I think maybe a book. I think maybe a book explaining this to people in layman's terms and talking about the root causes, because when I get on the phone with clients, all they ever tell me is, I went to the GI doctor and they told me, drink more water, eat more fiber, take some Miralax. And that's not helping. People need to know that they're not powerless. They don't need to resort to drugs, but they really do need to take a deep look at their daily living habits and where they can make changes to make themselves healthier. Because, like Hippocrates said, all health starts in the gut. You see it with skin, right? We know neurotransmitters are made in the gut. People with mental, emotional issues, anxiety, and panic attacks need to be looking at their gut.
Yeah.
Right. So that's where I would start. I would start with, startpoopingbetter.com. And if you can't make some changes on your own, so get some good gut testing.
Yeah. Awesome. And what other places can people find you online?
My website is melissahallklepacki.com. I'm on TikTok, sharing all kinds of educational information, and YouTube and Instagram. You'll find me there if you type my name in.
Awesome. And I'll make sure all those links will be in the show notes as well.
Perfect.
Melissa, thank you so much. It's been really great. The gut is a subject that, I can't talk enough about. It's one of my favorite subjects. And it's been really great to speak to someone who clearly, knows what they're doing when it comes to the gut as well. So thank you very much for your time today.
Yes, thank you. Good luck to everybody out there.
Awesome. So that's all from Melissa and me for this week. But don't forget to join me, same time, same place, next week on the Radical Health Rebel podcast. Thanks for tuning in. Remember to give the show a rating and a review, and I'll see you next time.